Okay, hello again, or hello if you didn't come to the previous ones of these. The Frank Davis Memorial Lecture Series for 2024 is devoted to surrealism because this is the centenary of the Manifesto of Surrealism, as some or all of you, I suppose, know by now. And this is the fourth lecture. The first three were by Krzysztof Ideological, whose work about Czech surrealism and photography. Fabrice Leventer's, who spoke about the Chilean artist Matter and the role of soil in political role of soil in his paintings. And the third one was by Alice Mann, who spoke about Dorothy Tannen's cloth sculptures from the mid-60s to the 1970s. And this week we welcome Patricia Almer, who will be speaking on trauma and resistance in the art of Unica Zürn, with particular reference to a fairy tale book for Friedrich Schröder-Sonnenstern. Patricia is Professor of Modern and Contemporary Art History at the University of Edinburgh, writer and curator whose published output has been voluminous, but I give some highlights. Her early research on Ready Magritte, which is when I first got to know Patricia, and Patricia's work was very important. She became a leading authority on Magritte. Her book, Lee Miller, Photography, Surrealism and Beyond, was an important contribution to the scholarship on Miller. She curated Angels of Anarchy, Women Artists in Surrealism at Manchester Art Gallery in 2009 to 10. And her current co-curated exhibition, The Traumatic Surreal, is on now at the Henry Moore Institute in Leeds until February. This was based on a book that I can say without any hesitation is truly groundbreaking. Her monograph, The Traumatic Surreal, which I'm in the middle of now, is superb. Book which came out of nowhere for me, German Art Brut, Surrealist Women Artists. It's an extraordinary book and will become one of the foundations for future writing on surrealism and the role of women in surrealism. Came out in 2022. Concerned, as I say, with Germanophone Women Artists, which is also her theme for today. So just to remind you that the format is about 50-minute lectures. I think that Patricia's going to go a little bit over that. About 10 or 15 minutes of questions afterwards, and then we go for drinks in this direction to the research forum seminar room. Patricia, welcome to the quarter.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody. I'm really grateful to Gavin for inviting me, and I'm absolutely delighted to mark and celebrate the Surrealism Centenary with you all today here at the Courtauld Institute. So it's really wonderful to be here. And I hope I can share my current research with you on Unica Zürn, which I'm very excited about. So my talk today is on Unica Zürn, Surrealism, Trauma, Resistance. Unica Zürn's drawing manuscript, Morte Kennedy of 1964, asserts an encounter with a historically traumatic moment that leads to the articulation of a form of political resistance. The work's intricate pictorial and verbal complexity suggests an overwhelming experience, an effort to encompass a historical totality in which the detailed articulation of multiple references and citations. So this compression is really present in a lot of Zürn's works. The visual density of Morte Kennedy makes it resistant to easy critical assimilation. It mixes repetitive patterning, iconography, musical and national symbols, so the US flag is mentioned at one point, and inscription in a verbal and visual poetics of excess, collapsing into a dark, obscure central mass of Indian ink. The title Morte Kennedy refers, of course, to a moment of deep and global historical rupture. It refers to a contemporary history of violence and political resistance, alluded to repeatedly by the work's accumulation of verbal reference. Names listed include Paul Robeson, George Gershwin, Beethoven, Bach. Dedications to old friends are Ernst Daniel, l'ami de oeuvre Berlin, psychiatrist treating Zürn, Mon ami Rabin, the Dr. Verbier, or global political figures, poor Mao Zedong, and Hitler is mentioned too. This range suggests a palimpsest of Cold War anxiety, both personal and global. Dense patterning based on musical notation delineates the dominant image the drawn mask or face disembodied floating amid a sea of signifiers which seemed to circulate around a sinister black hole at its center. This tension between the legibility of words and images and the illegible ink blot offers one version of the intersection of surrealism, trauma, and resistance. And this is the version I want to explore today. This demonic visage repeats in stylized form the many faces populating or haunting, perhaps, Zürn's drawings. Consistent return and repetition of this motif defines Zürn's aesthetics. And I quote, "For Zürn, there is one motif that always returns. It refers back to the origin of her system of delusion, in her most fundamental operation, the splitting apart of face and body." The face is bound, Felker argues, to autobiographical experience. It may be the face of idealized male projections, the Men of Jasmine, Henri Michaud, Hans Bellmer, Herman Melville, but it exists simultaneously outside history. The singular image of this face would seem, Felker argues, to be without history. Repetition and return are certainly fundamental constituents of Zürn's art. They establish lines of connection and recurrence across the oeuvre, markers of Zürn's obsessive reworkings of themes and motives, but also of the insistent contextual pressure of traumatic historical contexts. Of many examples, let's look at these three drawings from the 1962-64 album from St. Anne, Zürn's collaged and overdrawn copy of a book of Schumann piano pieces. These works clearly affiliate formally to Morte Kennedy, which further distorts the palimpsestic compressions of line drawing, text, and musical notation. The inserted white page states, on the top left, these three heads of what Zürn calls peu rouge were drawn in winter '62. At this time, Zürn was undergoing treatment in St. Anne in Paris. But under the top left and least head-like image, Zürn has written 23 Rue Jacob, Octobre 1964. She had returned to Paris that month after her stay in La Rochelle and Ile-de-Ré. Variations or apparent inconsistencies of dating are another significant dimension of Zürn's traumatic relations with history. They register the disturbing tremors of events and experiences to which her works frequently respond. Two of these images carry similar inscriptions. Big Chief, White Horse, Eagle, sick, Grand-père and Fils, grandfather and son. These inscriptions situate the drawings in relation to a specific and strange event in the culturally ambivalent history of German relations with Native Americans. This is a long and complex relationship of enduring colonial identification, described with some irony by Hartmut Lutz as Indian enthusiasm. So that's a very interesting history, the kind of German imaginary around Native Americans. Frank Usbech's book, Fellow Tribesmen, has explored in detail how Nazi ideology mobilized the deeply romanticized version of Native American identity to generate nationalist myths of Germanic tribal history. The historical Big Chief, White Horse, Eagle exemplified the problematic questions of race and identity mobilized by Germany's obsession with Native Americans, particularly in the interwar years. H. Glenn Penny writes, and I quote, "In 1929, newspapers in Germany's major cities trumpeted the presence of the putatively 107-year-old Big Chief White Horse Eagle, who, together with his white wife, Queen Boitena, was receiving a royal reception in city halls and expensive hotels in German metropolises." And indeed, if you go and search in the archives, in the newspaper archives, this Big Chief White Horse Eagle was very well known and visited all the different German cities and held court for the children there as well. The chief was apparently exposed as a charlatan, as Penny notes, and I quote, "He was no redskin, rather a mixed-raced Mexican," and Penny adds, "After several appearances in towns such as Munich, he abandoned a big hotel bill in Berlin under the cover of night and took his trade across the Channel to England." He was, writes Robert Dale Parker, "clearly a fraud, was probably not Indian, and surely was not so Indian as he claimed." Zürn was 13 in 1929 and may have been aware of media coverage of the chief's tour of Germany, or even attended his reception in Berlin. And I think it's very likely that she attended his reception in Berlin because she comes from an upper middle class family. The parents were very well connected. Her drawings over 30 years later of the chief thus draw on cultural and perhaps personal memories from which the element of racial scandal and the wider Nazi links of German versions of Native American cultures seem repressed. However, this element of scandal returns in the post-war revival of interest in Karl May's famous Western novels featuring the Apache chief Winnetou. The edition of May's Winnetou stories, which first appeared in the 1890s, was issued in 1963. Zürn may also have been aware of the release in 1964 of Hugo Fregonese's Old Shatterhands starring Lex Barker, one of several spaghetti westerns made between 1962 and 1968, based on May's books. And again, they were very popular, these westerns. Everybody would have known them in Germany. W. Raymond Wood argues that these novels significantly influenced the development of Nazi theories of race and natural man. Wood notes that Adolf Hitler avidly read May as a youth and as an adult owned a complete set bound in vellum, a gift from Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring. And just to note on the side, Karl May is still very well established in Germanophone countries, and kids are reading his novels. So it's a history which continues in all sorts of very strange ways. The post-war Karl May revival glossed over the problematic ideological dimensions of German interest in Native Americans. The name Winnetou grammatically resembles the word Bittenau, location of the Karl Bonhoeffer Nervenklinik, where Zürn was treated for her first breakdown in 1960-61. In my book, The Traumatic Surreal, I discussed how under the Nazi regime, this hospital performed forced sterilizations of the mentally ill. Zürn may also have owned a copy of Big Chief White Horse Eagle's book published in 1929, Via Indiana. This book, briefly mentioned by Ezra Plumer in her analysis of Zürn, was ghostwritten by Edgar von Schmidt-Pauli, who would become a notorious revisionist Nazi historian, and was made in 1933 board member of the Reichsverband Deutscher Schriftsteller by Propagandaminister Joseph Goebbels. The cover illustration of Via Indiana seems to have influenced another of her images. The drawing of En su Indiana, the word repeated from the Big Chief's title, is dedicated to the German outsider artist Friedrich Schröder-Sonnenstern. It's one element of the work I want to focus on. Now we are the Märchenbuch, the fairy tale book. In 1964, the same year as Morte Kennedy, while undergoing treatment in La Fonte Psychiatric Hospital in La Rochelle, Zürn made a 19-page word image text which he titled Ein Märchenbuch für Friedrich Schröder-Sonnenstern, a fairy tale book for Friedrich Schröder-Sonnenstern. The Sioux Indiana image appears in this work. The Märchenbuch is a composite artwork, a complex compendium of image and text in German and French, prose and poetry, painting and drawing, inhabiting spaces between artwork and text, between languages, and between autobiographical and historical reference. It offers a multifaceted articulation of celebration and mourning, and of protest and resistance against institutional power, specifically that of the psychiatric clinic. I want to consider two elements of this work. First, its assertion of Zürn's connections to German surrealist artistic traditions with the specific politics of resistance. and second, its repetition of traumatic themes and motifs returning from her earlier works by Zürn. Together, these two dimensions map out Zürn's relations to a counter-narrative of post-surrealist development. These counter-narrative threads engage with a specifically German set of historical burdens. Consequently, the work navigates a specifically German experience of historical trauma. Key dimensions of this engagement are apparent in this work's use of repetition and dating, markers of the insistence of history within which, to quote Hal Foster, repetition serves to screen the real understood as traumatic. Foster is referring to connections between Warhol's pop superrealism and the vestigial surrealism Foster sees re-emerging in postmodernism. Zürn's screening of the real, which as we'll see invokes the cinematic and television screen, is equally suggestive of a reorientation towards key elements of history that transforms post-war surrealism. The global trauma marked by Zürn's Morte Kennedy is of course also marked in Warhol's Death in America images, which are contemporary with the Zürn works I'm discussing. The Märchenbuch is dedicated to Zürn's friend and fellow artist, Friedrich Schröder-Sonnenstern. This first page is decorated with patterned hearts and a moon, beside the name Sonnenstern, a black sun. Across the top, a line of runic symbols appears like an inscription in some obscure exotic writing. At the bottom, Zürn has drawn a stylized, evidently female bust or portrait. Perhaps it's a self-portrait. This frenzy of ornamentation and inscription presents above all a complex network of signs in which Zürn fully explores the relations between word and image, signification and decoration. The Märchenbuch is, this first page asserts, above all a gift. It is für Friedrich Schröder-Sonnenstern, whose name is followed by 6 exclamation marks. These marks underscore the repetition of the name with another exclamation mark in the phrase Cher Sonnenstern, je vous aime. The gift celebrates Schröder-Sonnenstern's 72nd birthday, 11 September 1964, also of course the date of the work's creation. As its insistent but variable dating will show. In contrast with the timeless Once Upon a Time of the fairy tale implied by the title Märchenbuch, historical time insists in the repetition on the opening page of the date, 11/9/1964, which was a Friday. Work and birth date recur in a multitude of different forms, 1964, 11/9/64, 64, 5 times on this opening page. More date variations are repeatedly inscribed throughout the work. On one page, the next day, 12/9/64. On another, a snake inscribed Freitag, der 11.9.64. And on another, Sonnabend 64, which is Saturday, so presumably also the 12th. On another, 1964, September, a further page with a portrait of Salvador Dali, marked 12/9/64. One anonymously inscribed Unica Zürn, Ile de Ré, 1963, and the end pair of pages inscribed Paris, September 64, Hotel Joly, and in a final error of notation, Unica Zürn, September 194, which you can see. Dating thus recurs inconsistently throughout the work, a kind of insistent repetition through which the double historical moment of a birthday and an artistic creation is marked. Born in 1892, he dies in 1982, which is very strange as well. If you think about the number games what Unica Zürn played, it's strange that Schröder-Sonnenstern's birthday and that day end up being the same numbers. Born in 1892, Schröder-Sonnenstern had spent time in mental institutions after an incorrect diagnosis of schizophrenia, possibly incited to help evade conscription into the German army in the First World War. In the late 1940s, just as Zürn's own writing career was beginning. Roger Cardinal describes his aesthetic as one of scandal and derisive caricature, embodying lucid alienation. The press release for his 2012 exhibition at Michael Werner Gallery described his vagabond life in interwar Berlin, when he assumed the identity of an itinerant quack and religious cultist called Dr. Eliot Nas von Sonnenstern, apparently donating any profit he made to the city's poor. So it's interesting, you have two kind of quacks, charlatans. You've got the chief, White Horse Eagle, and then you've got also Sonnenstern, who became famous with putting people into all sorts of fake cures. He reappeared in Berlin after 1945, living with his partner Martha Möller and subsisting by selling salvaged wood for fires before embarking on his successful late career as an artist. Like Zürn, he spent some time in 1969 in the Karl Bonhoeffer Nervenklinik. Cardinal quotes Schröder-Sonnenstern's famous declaration of political resistance. You have smashed my hopes, gagged my spirit, tortured my soul, and now, stinking brute, you want me to vote for you. I vote for myself. This text experienced a strange and radical afterlife when it was used on anarchist posters in Liverpool in the 1980s. It emphasizes Zürn's clear affiliation with a uniquely radical and resistant figure in post-war German surrealism. By the late 1950s, Zürn and her then partner Hans Bellmer were familiar with Schröder-Sonnenstern and his work. A 1959 ink drawing by Zürn was exhibited in the Invention Neuve section alongside work of Sonnenstern in the Paris Exposition Internationale du Surrealism, or EROS, at Galerie Daniel Cordier, which went from 15 December of 1959 to 29th of February 1960. And you can see Zürn's piece here. I'm not sure whether it's lost. I'm trying to find it at the moment. Her work was reproduced in the catalogue for the Eros exhibition with her name misspelled Unica Zürn. Creating the Märchenbuch for Schröder-Sonnenstern on his birthday would thus have affirmed a long-term friendship and aesthetic and psychological solidarity between the two German artists. It marks also their shared experience of psychiatric institutions and perhaps recollects the shared traumas of life in post-war Berlin, to which I will return later. The Sioux Indianer Zürn dedicates to Schröder-Sonnenstern is one of many faces depicted in the Märchenbuch. For example, Zürn has drawn a pseudo-portrait of Salvador der Verrückte, the insane Dali, which seems to rework a portrait of an earlier page. Both pages are titled Sonnabend, so Saturday, and the Dali portrait is dated 12/9/64. The other is dated just 64 and located Irrenhaus, Frankreich, Madhouse, France. Zürn's Dali seems to be a parodically Duchampian detourning by the adding of an extravagant moustache of the other portrait, which is accompanied by the underlined words Rätsel und Wer ist das? So, riddle, who is that? These portraits' elaborate free-ball earrings suggest it depicts a woman, and the most likely candidate is Schröder-Sonnenstern's partner Martha Möller, who had died in January 1964. Another page of the Märchenbuch supports this reading. It dedicates the work again to Schröder-Sonnenstern and adds und in Erinnerung an Frau Martha, in memory of Frau Martha. This addition of an in memoriam recasts the work's function and tone. No longer simply a birthday present for a male artist, it is now also a riddle, whose answer seems to be a memorial text for a dead woman. Key to this shift is the work's intertextuality, another level of riddling, like Zürn's famous anagrams, which demands careful examination. This short poem reads: Das Leben ist ein Irrenhaus, da führt kein Weg in die Freiheit hinaus, und bald wohne ich im Vierbretterhaus mit der heiligen Mondmaus. Translated: Life is a madhouse, there's no way out to freedom, and soon I live in my four-plank house, presumably my coffin, with the holy moon mouse. The collocation of moon and mouse in words and images is a staple element of German language reading and writing primers for children, from at least the 1830s to the present. So you've got again this history which starts in the early 19th century, and as you can see, it continues. So even nowadays, kids, when they learn to read or write, they get the moon mouse as some of the exercises. Zürn also alludes to the first stanza, in particular of the poem Die Mitternachtsmaus by Christian Morgenstern, published in his Geigenlieder, Songs of the Gallows in 1905, which is frequently reprinted in German anthologies. Wenn's mitternächtigt und nicht Mond noch Stern das Himmelshaus bewohnt, läuft 12-mal durch das Himmelshaus die Mitternachtsmaus. Translated, if it's midnight and not moon, no star inhabits the heavenly house, runs through the heavenly house 12 times the midnight mouse. Morgenstern's poem provides the rhyming aus sounds, house, mouse, and the link between mouse and moon that organized Zürn's verse. I've discussed elsewhere how the word aus plays across Zürn's writing, exploiting German phonemes to embed in the text the desire to escape to an imagined outside, constantly revealed as identical to the imprisoning inside. This short poem clearly repeats this trope, protesting the impossibility of escaping the derangement of the madhouse of the world. This poem is one of several moments in the Märchenbuch where the reality of Zürn's autobiographical and historical experience of mental illness and psychiatric hospitalization press up against and ruptures the screen of textual and image repetition. Intertextuality affirms the work's existence within a network of signifiers different from and extending far beyond that circulating the enclosed world of the psychiatric institution. Zürn's allusions to books, the Big Chief's book Wir Indianer, and poetry remembered from childhood, alongside her dedication of the work to Schröder-Sonnenstern and the late Martha Möller, affirm her alignment with Germanic cultural traditions and away from the Francophone affiliations with Belmer, Michaud, and Parisian surrealism, on which most critics of her work concentrate. These intertextual allusions are perhaps further refracted through her experience of motherhood. Another traumatizing event occurred in early summer 1964, when Zürn was visited for the first time in 4 years by her 21-year-old daughter Katrin. Another link to the Berlin-based post-war history she shared with Schröder-Sonnenstern comes in the evocation on another page of the Märchenbuch of Po-Fresser as anagram of professor, but with the German inside Po-Fresser, which means ass-eater. And you can see Heinz Trökers, so this refers to Heinz Trökers. This page offers an oil and vinegar artwork and abstrakte Scheiße, she writes, so abstract shit. Trökers was, Korais Goldstein argues, the German surrealist of the post-war period. He left Berlin in 1938 when his exhibition at Galerie Nierendorf was closed down by the Nazis, but returned a year later, manning the city's anti-aircraft defenses until deserting in 1944. In 1945, Trökers co-founded the very important Galerie Gerd Rosen, the first modern art gallery in post-war Berlin. He was active in reconstructing the Berlin art scene in the late 1940s, and a friend of Zürn and her then partner Alexander Camargo. At this time, he was active in the Berlin Badewanne group, which produced post-war German performance and visual art applying surrealist techniques previously banned by the Nazis. In June 1963, a year before Zürn's visit to La Rochelle, Trökers had exhibited 96 works in the Kleine Galerie Walter Schüler in Berlin, 4 months after an exhibition there by Alexander Camargo in February 1963. The phrase abstrakte Scheiße suggests that Zürn is sharing with Schröder-Sonnenstern a joke about recent abstract work by Trökers, For example, the Spring distributed with his 1960 work, Hommage à Max Ernst, to which Zürn resemblance. The conspicuous and childish pricing of Zürn's Abstrakte at 1000 Deutsche Mark, Westmark actually, further indicates a less than respectful poking of fun at Trökes, implying Zürn perceives him as having sold out. Interestingly, an edition of Gérard de Nerval's tales illustrated by Trökes was published in Schleiden in 1963. Black Sun, which Julia Kristeva appropriates in her 1987 study of depression and melancholia, Soleil Noir. Nerval's Black Sun may have prompted the many black suns that decorate several pages of Zürn's Märchenbuch, itself a work made during a period of nervous depression. A key element of the Märchenbuch rests in the word reserviert, reserved. Several blank pages of the Märchenbuch bear Zürn's inscription declaring them reserviert, reserved for the use of Schröder-Sonnenstern. So you can see it here. She writes, I've written the German version and then the translation there. Diese beiden Seiten leeren Zeichen, crossed out, Seiten Papiers sind für den hochverehrten Meistermaler Friedrich Schröder-Sonnenstern reserviert, wenn eines schönen sonnigen Dezembermorgens mal kein einziges Stückchen Zeichen und Malpapier haben sollte. The correction of Zeichen, which means sign, to Seiten, pages, draws attention to the semiotic complexity of the Märchenbuch. Its blank, in inverted commas, pages signify reserved spaces for future feeling or occupation. So this whole notion about reserving something is really interesting in this context. They gesture to a communal creative activity, a shared productivity akin to the surrealist cadaver. Such collaboration would resist any reading of the Märchenbuch in terms of simple autobiography or as reflection of Zürn's psychic interiority. Reservieren carries very specific etymological meanings that embed within the gesture the complex oscillating temporalities of past, future and present that disorganize the Märchenbuch, meaning to keep a place or a room free for future use. It derives from French, keep back or in store for future use, keep as one's own, and from Latin reservare, to keep back, save up, retain, preserve. It's a very interesting temporal term. The notion of reserving involves a kind of withholding or occupying space in relation to its future use. To book, Märchenbuch, is to keep reserved for future use. It is notably not free, as is affirmed by the implicit pun on the Native American reservations. The tension between reservation and freedom of these empty but used up pages echoes the institutional history of the La Fonte Hospital in La Rochelle. La Fonte had been established as a medical institution in 1829. In August 1940, it was appropriated by the occupying German troops, and in 1943 it was repurposed as a military prison holding resistance fighters and some German prisoners. Louis Grima, in his History of La Rochelle, notes that psychiatric cells became prison cells where hundreds of resistance fighters and deported German prisoners were imprisoned and tortured. As a German inmate of this French institution 2 decades later, Zürn was undoubtedly aware of this history of forced reservation and occupation and its relations to the French resistance. This history, in turn, puts into focus her dedication of the Märchenbuch to Schröder-Sonnenstern, a figure of the resistant radical German avant-garde. Zürn would also have been alert to the traumatic resonances of La Fonte's history in Berlin during and after the war. These experiences, of course, permeate and deeply influence Zürn's post-war writings and art, as I've discussed in the Traumatic Surreal. I'll finish by briefly exploring some A key page of the Märchenbuch demonstrates how the connections of indicated affiliations, sometimes problematic or contradictory, with German artists and cultural traditions, intertextual references and allusions to literature and film, inter-oeuvre repetitions of themes and motifs, work to expand the otherwise enfolding parameters of Zürn's works. The second page of the work features a series of black ink blots with docked beneath the words Atombombe and the place and date 12/9/64, Irrenanstalt, Insane Asylum, La Rochelle, Frankreich. The ink blots spread across the page. The blackness, like the black hole at the center of Morte Kennedy, resists interpretation, gesturing instead towards a limit or threshold of representation. Pictorialism collapsing into the abstraction of atomic destruction. The words Atombombe are similarly smudged, except the clearer final E, added with a different brush. Zürn was involved in anti-nuclear protests in France and Germany. She contracted the yellow fever that led to the period of hospitalization documented in Das Haus der Krankheiten after attending an anti-nuclear meeting in Paris in 1958. An anagram text produced in Berlin in 1954, Wasserstoffbombe, wir beten dich an, translated hydrogen bomb, we worship you, responds to the American hydrogen bomb tests over Bikini Atoll on 1st of March of that year. In a letter to Geser and Ernst Schröder of 8th of February 1958, Zürn wrote of her interest in how an artist might represent the atom bomb. So she's really thinking about nuclear catastrophe and the danger of it. We talk about the atom bomb every morning over coffee in Ermenonville, and we rack our brains over what form and what tone to find if we want to say something about it in an article, as we have already been asked to do. We, especially I, studied the position of young German poets on this problem. We occasionally get various literary reviews sent to us from Germany. I don't think it's about sentimentality, resignation and melancholy, nor about condemning the militarists and politicians. Rather, irony, bloody scorn and iciness should be expressed, making the readers so stupid, so involving them in their sheep stupid yes to everything that happens until they get angry, until they no longer want to be considered so stupid. You think about it a lot, every day. You can't get away from it, but you shouldn't write about it until you find the right tone. It can no longer be the tone of the Gross and Dix era that didn't help as great as it was. So I find that, again, a very interesting, the last line, a very interesting moment in Zürn. The search for an appropriate form and tone through which to represent the Atombombe, the atom bomb, and the atomic age is one dimension of the development of post-war avant-garde art. Zürn's Atombombe image offers a complex example of this preoccupation, in which memory and anticipation both individual and cultural. Zürn's inscription Atombombe works as a screen masking older and deeper wounds, both historically real and anticipated. The image turns to both a and a fantasized and feared future of atomic holocaust. This temporal ambivalence engages the paradoxical temporalities that Hal Foster associates with the avant-garde. And I quote, it continues to return, but it returns from the future. Zürn's navigation of this screen memory in images and words involved drawing on a variety of historical and textual sources. It is expressed not in this image's resemblance to conventional iconographies of atomic war, but in its difference from them. In film, the Atombombe image suggests but differs from a range of works by post-war women surrealist artists responding to the atomic age. For example, Jean Graveroll's Le Langage de Fleur from 1954, in which an atomic mushroom cloud is shown inside, inverting Magrittean poetics are incongruously replacing the expected view of a domestic interior. Zürn's image, however, three large black spider-like blots stained towards the left margin, eschews the convention of the mushroom cloud. It resembles more closely a work like Meret Oppenheim's Schwarze Wolken, Black Clouds, of 1960, which, as I've argued in the Traumatic Surreal, revives a specific wartime iconography. An earlier work by Zürn provides a precursor for the Atombombe image. In 1960, while on vacation at Palavas-le-Flot in the south of France, she produced an anagram drawing Der Geist aus der Flasche, the spirit out of the bottle. This work incorporates Zürn's anagrammatic reworkings of the title sentence in a variety of forms. 9 blocks of anagram variations totaling, in the Gesamtausgabe transcription of them, 58 lines. While several of the Gedichte are appended with dedications or credits for the source line, Zürn has uniquely added a comment to this one. And I quote, "Note, one can continue ad infinitum to find anagram poems from this sentence, but the 9 has put a stop to it. It seems that the line, Der Geist aus der Flasche, like its content, sets off the anagram poet's version of a chain reaction, producing new sense-making combinations ad infinitum." But this image, like the Native American heads Zürn drew a few years later, has its source in an older image. In 1957, Walt Disney released the educational film, educational in inverted commas, Our Friend the Atom. It was dubbed into various languages and broadcast across Europe and accompanied by a book also published in translations across Europe, for example in France by Hachette in 1958. It was broadcast on German television on Tuesday, 29th of January 1958 under the title Unser Freund das Atom. This film was part of a series of propaganda texts to persuade viewers that atomic energy's peaceful potential far outweighed its destructive threat. A sequence in the film showed the Disney cartoon version of the fairy tale The Fisherman and the Genie, in which the genie appears as a large plume of dark smoke, literally der Geist aus der Flasche. And here's a clip from the English version, and notably the German version uses the word Märchen, which is also interesting.
As you can see, we found ourselves deep in the field of nuclear physics. Of course, we don't pretend to be scientists. We're storytellers. So we combine the tools of our trade with the knowledge of experts. We added a nationally known scientist to our staff to head our new science department. His first assignment was to write the book on the atom and to help us in developing this program. And here to tell you the story of our friend the atom is the author of our book, Dr. Heinz Haber.
As we developed our story of the atom, we made an amazing discovery. We had a science story, but suddenly we realized that it was almost like a fairy tale. By a strange coincidence, our story turned out to be like the old fable from the Arabian Nights, The Fisherman and the Genie. This tale tells of an age-old wish of man, a wish to be the master of a mighty genie that does his bidding. There was once an old fisherman who lived in great poverty. One day, after casting his net many times, he happened to pull ashore a brazen vessel. Its mouth was closed with a lead stopper. Marveling at his strange catch, the fisherman said,
"I'll wager that whatever is sealed so well must contain something of great value."
Know that presently thou wilt have to die.
Heaven forbid!
Zürn almost certainly saw this film either in Germany or at Ermenonville in France. Its iconography informs her 1960 drawing and her later Atombombe plots. So, and if you look at, this is the book of our friend the atom bomb, and it's interesting to Zürn's drawing, which actually looks like a frame-by-frame animation, so it becomes quite cinematic, which is also interesting because she worked for a film company for oeuvre, and she worked in advertising and animation, so it's quite interesting in that context. But it also evokes imagery from recent history that insists in her writings and which wants Oppenheim's Black Clouds, images of smoke and ovens evoking the remembered horrors of the war in Berlin. To take one example, in L'Homme Jasmine, a narrative deeply haunted by memories of wartime horror, the image of the Black Cloud appears as a double marker of the bombing of Berlin in 1945, which Zürn and her family endured, and of the smoke of the Holocaust ovens. And I quote, "Back in her bed, she begins to think of things from the past, including the war, of the bright spring day when hundreds of bombers had cast the fire onto the city until the sky had been so darkened by black smoke it had seemed like night. In the evening after this chaos, when the streets had smelled of gas from the broken pipes, she walked past the freshly destroyed, still smoking ruin of a house and heard a loud, uncanny gurgling noise coming from the charred, decimated walls." And a couple of pages later, the image appears inside her of an enormous oven belching clouds of black, stinking smoke. The Märchenbuch thus performs a complex and contradictory set of functions. It asserts in its to Schröder-Sonnenstern and Martha Möller and citation of Hans Trökes Zürn's relations in 1964 with contrasting movements within specifically German aesthetic traditions. But it also reveals her unease with certain historical elements of these connections. In these images from the Märchenbuch, we can discern a clear and repeated trajectory. A later work returns to an earlier work, which is itself a screen memory, a defense against an older trauma. The unthinkable association of seductive Native American exoticism with the disaster of Nazi nationalism, the association of atomic explosions with the firebombing of German cities and the ovens of Birkenau. Zürn's drawings gravitate towards the obscure, dark centers of works like Morte Kennedy or the plot of Atombombe. These are figures of spaces within her images that ultimately resist interpretation, markers of a trauma that remains irresolvable. So I've traced some of the inter-oeuvre repetitions and the intertextual threads and connections to earlier works and to reference points in the history and culture and to memories of childhood reading that organized the Märchenbuch as a key work in post-war German surrealism. In this work, Zürn registers in images and texts distorted by repetition and fractured temporality the tremors of traumatic personal and cultural memory. Traumatic memories of the war and of Nazism merge with the fear of future holocausts. They are screened and reworked in image and text, but threaten always to collapse into the terrifying black hole of non-signification, around which all Zürn's works insistently gravitate and which they constantly resist. So thank you very much for listening.